1263rd day of the war. The United States and Russia are trying to reach an agreement to give Ukraine part of the territory on which Russia is applying for, in exchange for literally nothing. The deal in the current form looks impossible, so the breakthroughs from the meeting planned for August 15th of Trump and Putin are not expected even in the Kremlin and the vicinity. On the other hand, for the first time, the Kremlin has refused all its idiotic goals, denazification, demilitarization, and other nonsense, as well as from the claims of the cities of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. If we imagine that the announced plans of the Kremlin are the maximum for the start of the negotiations, then in the event of the right pressure, something can be drawn. However, so far it all comes down to the fact that Putin has once again come up with a way to bring Trump to his nose. The worse the case for himself, the better time the President of the United States will have against Ukraine and Europe. Details in a minute. Russia does not know where to get oil from which India has refused. China will hardly be able to buy all the unneeded volumes left, and lately raw oil in Russia has become even more. Only 2 Ukrainian strikes have led to the destruction of 10% of Russia's oil production capacity, at least for a month. Ukraine and Russia have started a new stage in the race for unmanned technology. Both sides are developing drone control protocols through retranslators with Starlink and special ground robots, which will launch these very drones while operators control them from the offices of Kiev and Moscow. The war of the future is happening in our eyes, and we will hope that Ukraine will remain on it one step forward. The future of the future, and the real Russian soldiers look unpleasurable. They are being paid for work and compensation for their wounds. They are sent to fight with unheeded wounds, and military police scram them on every block of post. Of course, if they still return to their rear, they put evil on the Russian civilians. The resident of the city of Tumes stated about the attack on Nir and not about the participant of the war in Ukraine. He is still not detained. You can support this and much more in today's fresh report with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially for YouTube algorithms. Your subscriptions are important. Yesterday, even unnoticed about Ukrainian-Russian peace initiatives. It turned out that the powerful sanctions promised to Trump as the time of the ultimatum expired did not come into effect, although the ceasefire does not smell. It would be extremely unpleasant, but another insides were poured into it. Start with, Bloomberg reported that the United States and the Russian Federation are discussing a deal, as a result of which Ukraine will have to completely leave the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, in exchange for the stop of the Russian offensive in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Next, I will give a retort from the channel to Bior. The transfer of Putin to the Donetsk and Lugansk regions provides him with full control over Donbass, which he has not been able to achieve in the military for 3.5 years of combat actions. The deal is not even about the full ceasefire, that is, Putin will simply stop advancing in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, but there is nothing about the ceasefire of airstrikes, for example. It is also not clear what is happening with Sumy and Kharkov regions, where Putin is also conducting an offensive. The transfer of Donetsk and Lugansk regions should open the way, quote, to the ceasefire and the beginning of technical negotiations about a peace agreement. The United States is trying to get support from Ukraine and Europe, but so far this is not guaranteed. Zelensky risks being in the situation take or leave, and Europe is afraid that the United States will just put it on the monitor of the ceasefire and watch how Putin conducts the rearmament. It is not a fact that Putin will agree to a three-way meeting with Trump and Zelensky even if he manages to achieve the agreement from the United States. Here is the deal, comments Bitely. Perhaps some details are missed, some details are not exactly transferred. If the deal really is in this form, then Ukraine and Europe will never go to this. Moreover, Putin does not even guarantee anything to Trump. It is just say, give Donbass and then we will talk about the ceasefire. Putin is just using Trump and his personal interests to achieve his goal: control over all of Ukraine. If you can try to take advantage of Trump's naive nature and take Donbass with little blood, then why not try it? Ukraine offers to give Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Pokrovsk, Konstantinovka, Druzhkivka, Seversk, Lemensk in exchange, but not for anything. In fact, like Putin will be more cooperative. At the same time, it seems that Trump gave Putin a whole week to think. The American president wrote on the social network Truth Social that he will meet with Putin in Alaska on the next Friday, August 15. Zelensky can take part in the Alaska summit on the next Friday, writes to himself with a link to the high-ranking official of the White House. However, again, apparently, it is all written in village by village. We are now in a phase of extremely international diplomatic turbulency. Everyone talks to everyone without a break. Putin called the owners of China and several other leaders of the countries, which he considers allies or at least not enemy. The United States, Europe, and Ukraine are also constantly on calls, so the situation is changing literally every second. It is impossible to catch up with it, and it does not have much meaning. Tomorrow it will change again. Initially, Zelensky was ready to meet with Trump and Putin in Rome, but the Kremlin refused. The Italian agency ANSA reports that Prime Minister Meloni supported Trump's idea of a three-way peace summit in Rome or Vatican. The United States has already sent official requests to its allies, and Zelensky approved this format. However, Moscow blocked Italy's choice, saying that the country is too close to its allies. According to the agency, the real reason is that Italy is obligated to arrest Putin by order of the International Criminal Court. Meanwhile, Wall Street Journal came up with Putin's details of the negotiations with Witkoff in Moscow. Details again are provided by the author of the channel, to be or Witkoff provided details of Ukraine and Europe. There were already 3 conscripts with European leaders on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. During today's, or rather yesterday's conscripts, Witkoff told details of Putin's proposal from 2 stages. The first stage, Ukraine brings troops from Donbass, the front line freezes. The second stage, Putin and Trump agree on a final peace plan which will later be presented to Zelensky. In addition, Putin demands confirmation of Russian control over Crimea, de jure. As for the confirmation of Donetsk and the Lugansk regions, it is not clear, but it is clear that Putin can require this. Putin, for his part, promised to accept the legislation obligatory not to attack Ukraine and Europe. Adolf Hitler also signed a paper in 1938 that no one will be attacked anymore when they were given a court to comment on whether to be or not. Europeans with deep skepticism responded to the proposal. Ukraine is demanding large concessions. Russia is not accepting anything. Russia is not taking any responsibility. Europeans and Ukrainians are fairly afraid that Putin just found another reason to avoid sanctions and continue the war. Now the pressure can turn towards Kiev and Putin will avoid new sanctions. Witkoff told the Europeans that this proposal demonstrates Putin's honest plans for the world. Witkoff is some kind of catastrophe, comments on to be or, and it is difficult to disagree with him. I have already told you that Trump has a clear understanding that Putin is the enemy, that Putin is the one who does not want peace and wants to fight. And the only thing I wrote in the videos and separately about this story and in the reports, that the only thing that can interfere with this is the F** seekers who are tired of Putin and who will cross all this beep through the ocean directly into Trump's ears. Unfortunately, apparently this is how it happened. It is still assumed that the final deal can be different from Putin's initial proposal. What can I say? Understates vitally. Now it all depends on how much Europe can convince Trump that Putin is pushing full ***, not having any guarantees or obligations. The problem is not only in the fact that there are no guarantees. To give Putin Donbass is to give the most fortified Ukrainian cities and defense lines, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, which became real fortitudes over the years of war. According to the fact, this plan is worse than the April proposal of Witkoff and Putin when they were going to recognize Crimea. The recognize of Crimea did not change the situation on the ground. Giving Sloviansk to Kramatorsk is a radical change of the battlefield. So now the task of all diplomacy and all information centers in the world is to explain to Trump that he can repeat 1938 and enter into history like New Chamberlain, according to Vitally. The only good news is that in the Kremlin and in the vicinity, they're also not waiting for anything from the meeting of Putin with Trump. Officials and experts of the close Kremlin do not expect a possible meeting of Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump of turning points, which can change the situation and bring the war to an end, sources in Versk told. Propagandists directly admit that it is important for both countries to demonstrate their work. There is still no compromised option for the end of the war, Versk said. The propagandists in the structure entering the domestic political bloc of the Kremlin, according to him, Russia cannot agree only on the part of captured territories entered into the constitution as new regions, because then it will turn out that the Russian Federation itself gave them back to the Nazi Bander regime. Not beautiful, yes, but even if everyone were free, officially our territory brings Veresky, the words of the official, then on their official confirmation, Russia would not go to Zelensky, mean the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, not Europe. And I'm afraid whoever wasn't at Zelensky's place, it would be unacceptable for him. So far, the only working option is to continue to fight, he is sure. Putin and Trump's meeting will have to illustrate the stormy activity, says another source of information from Veresky in the Kremlin. According to him, Moscow actively shows that we are the ones who are ready to talk. The only thing that hinted that these negotiations can be to some degree real is that everyone is not pleased at all. The usual is just a criteria of the real negotiations that have started, what is called the necessary but not enough criteria. Therefore, it is impossible to talk about this with confidence. In any case, in the evening we will discuss all this nonsense with you and the proposal of the brought out and its problems and where there is space to turn into something real. Well, it's not a big deal, but it exists. Also, I want to say to everyone this, I'm also on edge like you are. All these emotional swinging is really exhausting. We've been fooled many times before, waiting for some significant breakthroughs. I think everyone watching this video wants the war to end. I also really want that to happen, but let's keep a cold head. The next week will be like American war rages. There will be insides with hope, with disappointment, with betrayal, with victory, and there will be a lot of everything. 90%, of course, it will be information garbage. Be strong, we will do this together. In the meantime, the restrictions that Trump still managed to introduce before that continue to work. Russia offers China oil euros at a reduced price against the backdrop of India's purchases, reports Bloomberg. After Trump added additional tariffs on Indian imports due to Russian oil purchases, India's state-funded enterprises began to turn around its pot purchases for euros. Moscow is trying to remove China once it has freed itself, reducing the price of the brand from $2.5 to about $1.5 per barrel. According to traders, Chinese state-owned enterprises and private enterprises have already purchased 5 to 10 parts for delivery in October, but experts note that China will hardly be able to beat in all that came out of Indian purchases. Urals is not a basic type for Chinese state-owned enterprises, and Beijing will likely take into account the risk of trade delays from the United States. Either way, in the Ministry of China, Bloomberg stated that buying Russian oil is a legal trade, and Beijing will continue to cooperation with Moscow, despite the threat of Washington to take tariffs on the import of its energy carriers. India said something similar, by the way, but the purchase was reduced. If you did not have enough bad news from the United States, then the main Ukraine fob of the Pentagon, Albridge Colby, made a response strike. The essence of the radar explains in the Ukrainian channel. In fact, here is what is written there. Have you missed the leader of the Pentagon policy, Albridge Colby? No, and he seems to be very much like us. CNN writes that in the last month, Colby developed a memorandum for the Pentagon, which provides the U.S. Defense Ministry with the opportunity to reshuffle a certain type of weapons and equipment intended for Ukraine back to the American stockpiles. 4 sources familiar with the document were reported. Now the $1 billion previously allocated for Ukraine will go to the replenishment of U.S. stockpiles. Even despite the fact that Trump approved the plan to sell American weapons to Ukraine through NATO, the Pentagon keeps serious concerns about the transfer of weapons to Kiev from American stockpiles, especially as it concerns the required positions that remain in the shortage, such as missile interceptors, defense system, and artillery ammunition. The Colby Memorandum contains a position allowing Pentagon to return weapons to American stockpiles. Source points out that the weapon, it seems, has not yet been redeployed, but this norm can deprive Ukraine of $1 billion in American weapons, expected in the coming months and years. This also blows up the USAI program created specifically to allocate Pentagon funds to the purchase of weapons for Ukraine directly from American defense operators. On July 31, the U.S. Senator's office, according to the amendments, advanced the bill, providing about $1 billion for Ukraine's aid in the security sector, including $800 million for USAI within the framework of the yearly budget of Pentagon. The Law of National Defense and NDA, but it remains unclear whether the weapons produced to enter Ukraine in accordance with the new policy of Pentagon were delivered to the sources of CNN. In the previous administrations, the officials of Pentagon believed that the reshuffle of weapons produced within the USI back to the American stockpiles would break the law on control over impoundment, presidential impoundment control, notes one of the sources. New policy of Pentagon is already facing a certain opposition in the Senate. In the proposed law on national defense for the 26th year, the legislation has recently introduced a norm allowing Pentagon to reshuffle weapons only if it has not yet been delivered to Ukraine and no longer is required for training, equipment, and consultative activity within the USI. Hexted is also obligated to report to the Congress before such a reshuffle, the law says. In addition to the USI, Pentagon still has almost $4 billion in full power to fund the Congress's approved last year for the supply of weapons to Ukraine directly from the American stockpiles to the DPRK. Some allies of the plan, including the UK, call on the United States to use this full power to increase pressure on Putin, sources reported. Another source familiar with the situation notes that Pentagon will probably allow these $4 billion in full power to lose power. The Memorandum of Colby, approved by Hexet, shares American stock on the categories red, yellow, and green. Red and yellow include weapons that Pentagon considers shortage and now require clear Hexet's approval before sending it somewhere. For example, interceptors for the Patriot system belong to the red category, according to sources. The weapon package stopped by Hexet last month for Ukraine included dozens of interceptors, but Trump ordered Hexet to continue their supply. At the moment, the Ministry of Defense generally follows this directive. However, other types of weapons in the package also related to the red category, the sources reported. It is unknown whether they were supplied. In general, the only reliable scheme for supplying American weapons remains the purchase of European funds, but even there it will depend on the assessment of the Pentagon reserves, so some of Ukraine's required positions can be blocked. In general, there's little to feel good about, so Europe should take care of expanding its own production as quickly as possible, especially in positions that are now unique to the United States. First of all, let me remind you about anti-ballistical air defense missiles and high-precision jet shells. It's very good that in Germany, as I told you recently, they have already forgotten this question, although the first products will have to wait at least until next year. And in the background of a potentially new transfer of Trump to Putin's camp, this is even more relevant. That is, in fact, when we talk to you about this whole story with negotiations, we do not talk about the fact that the world is likely soon. This is not true, at least nothing points to this right here and now. We talk to you about the fact that it is soon possible to return to the basic scenario about Trump, which I described to you since November last year, that Trump will in every way stop the support of Ukraine, the armed, intelligence, and everything else. Unfortunately, we are back in this slum and Trump optimism, which was the last 1.5 months on the outskirts, but we will not run forward, because in the protection of Trump, which of course I hate and consider degenerate, I will say that Trump himself and Marco Rubio said that the suggestions from Russia look now more objective, but Trump himself emphasized that there is no breakthrough yet. Therefore, it is possible that their transition to the Putin camp has not yet happened, and something can interfere with it. We will hope that it will interfere. Well, before moving on, I would like to remind you that you can not only support this video with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel, but also support the channel financially. You can do this on Patreon, the link to which is in the description, and by buying NVPN. This is a tool to bypass blockages that allow you to bypass blockages. You can watch YouTube at a normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, Discord, go to blocked resources. In general, it is normal to use the internet. The state should not decide what to watch, listen, and read. Buying VPNs and using them in Russia is not forbidden yet. Well, we hope it will not be forbidden in principle, although everything can be expected. If something changes, we will definitely let you know, and in the meantime, you can buy a VPN by the link in the description, thereby supporting, including the release of new videos. Thank you very much for that, and we are moving on. Respected viewers, I report with regret that we have achieved a heavy loss. On August 8, not coming to mind, General Colonel Alexander Lapin was shot from the position of commander of the Russian group of troops, Northern. Everyone who has been closely monitoring the war in Ukraine for a long time understands why this is such a sad news. Ukraine is many times obligated by General Lapin to send an offensive on Chernigovщина at the beginning of the war. The catastrophe on the crossing through the Seversky Donetsk near Belogorovka, heroic defense of Lyman with the subsequent negative offensive of Fiasco in the north of the Kharkov region in the summer of 2024, and no less heroic defense of the Kursk region, and now the star career of the Russian military chief has unfortunately stopped. The first to report this is the author of the Z channel, Anastasia Kashvarova. The story with the capture of Ukrainian armed forces of the Kursk region continues to develop not in the financial key, but in the military. She wrote, some movements around General Lapin began to say that Lapin is everything. Different sides confirm the information that in the year of the capture of Ukrainian armed forces of the Kursk region, our troops liberated the Kursk region this year, shooting General Call Alexander Lapin, commander of the North Group, but the order is not yet published. We are waiting. If so, then the shooting of such a general is very symbolical. At the same time, it is known that it was not just shot, but dismissed from the Russian armed forces. It is believed that the check of the full Kursk region of all the conditions in which thousands of people died. Because the check is needed not only from the side of construction of fortification structures, well, and why in the looting on the construction which were stole from the state funds, there were no servicemen, why before the entry of Ukrainian armed forces there were not enough forces to resist. General Call Evgeny Nikiforov wrote later Kashvarov was appointed to command the group Sever. He had previously commanded the Western Military District Group Zapad, head of the main headquarters of the Russian armed forces. It was once removed to be assigned to Lapina. Now it's the opposite rocker supporting, writes Kashvarov. Nikiforov was sent to the Kursk region at the beginning of August last year, and when there, the Ukrainian armed forces came in to change the order. Before that, this direction was in the full power of General Call Lapina. In fact, the double power was established, which continued until yesterday. General Call Alexander Lapin was ordered to leave. If it's serious, then the fact that Russian armed forces began dismissing ineffective generals is bad news for Ukraine. The only question is where to take effective ones in the Russian system. Let's hope there's none. Well, we'll watch Nikiforov's actions in the Sumy and Kharkov directions, which is responded by the group Northern, faithful to him. Something tells me he won't surprise us with anything, although, of course, we can't relax with the defenders of Ukraine. Well, the positive fact is that he kind of controlled part of this group, and as Kashvarov writes, there was a double power situation. We also see how he controlled it. The satellite service NASA firms recorded a powerful firework near the military airfield Milarovo in the Rostov region. The Telegram channel publishes videos with smoke from the strike. The governor of the region, Yuri Slusar, wrote that overnight after the attack of UAVs in Milarovo, the tanker got burned with gasoline. No one was injured. According to Radio Svoboda and the channel Kramsky Vetter, the attack target was the GSM Artan base and the Kar gas-powered compressor station. A part of the railway was left without power after the attack on the power substation in the Rostov region. Astra found out the details of the UAV attacks on the Rostov region, which took place on August 5. According to sources, the night of the drone Haisu fell on the edge of the Kutter and Verkhnitalovka in the Mylorovsky district, harming the traction power substation of the old village on the crossroad of Mylovovo-Tersovskaya. As a result, 2 reserve transformers burned on the substation territory. The administrative building was destroyed. When the substation was attacked, it turned out to be out of stock as well as part of the North Caucasus Railway, SKGD. Also, the UAV damaged the support of the high-voltage line. A fire train was brought to Toshenya. It was without dead and injured people. The Governor General Sukar confirmed the fire at the substation Verkhnitalovka on an area of 500 square meters. Later, in the Southern Transport Prosecutor's Office, they reported a failure in the train schedule. Why does Ukraine make such strikes and what can this lead to? I will remind you of the tactics to implement the failure of Russian railway logistics in a recent video. The strikes of Ukrainian drones on Ryazan and Novokhybershevsk oil companies have failed almost 10% of the power of Russian oil processing. The repair, according to Reuters, will take about a month. The plant in Ryazan, with a daily power of 13.7 million tons per year, reduced production by half, and Novokhybershevsk, 83 million tons per year, stopped the work of the main system of aft 11. As a result, more than 8% of the total volume of oil production in Russia, 267 million tons in 2024, was temporarily unavailable, which led to the increase in oil exports and the rest of the raw oil to the sea. However, it is not very clear where to export it now. Ukrainian Accenture and Project Zaporizhzhia learned the video gore with the strike of Russian radars in Crimea with long-range FPV drones and found an even wider goal on it than stated Ukrainian intelligence. This is what the analysts wrote about it. In yesterday's video gore, our attention was distracted by the strike of the RLS 96L6 S400, which is not 96L6 at all. We analyzed the visual signs of the object and can say that this is the new RLS 98L6 Yenisi, which is the standard radar for the ZRK S500 Promte. The state test of this station took place in 2020-21, and according to open sources, it came to service in 2021-2022. This is what the Russians themselves write about it. The RLS NISI base is a multi-elemental anti-aircraft protection active phased antenna bars, allowing you to accompanied by hypersonic targets moving at heights of up to 120 kilometers with a speed of up to 4,800 meters per second, with a perspective of up to 7,000 meters per second. In other words, the system actually enables you to intercept low orbital cosmic targets. And that's not all. An incredibly large and expensive target hit by Ukrainian UAVs makes a conclusion in Zaporizhzhia. Russian concerns about Ukrainian drones are going to the point where it makes sense. Russians deployed anti-drone nets on the basis of nuclear submarines Rybichi of the Pacific Ocean Fleet located in Kamchatka. This was noted by Synthanalyst M.T. Anderson. Looking at the photo of Aksar from August 2, the base where submarines with Russian nuclear weapons are located is in Krasnonikov Bay. The researcher saw that a part of the pier is covered by nets and a nuclear multi-purpose submarines of the Project 949A Ante by NATO's official classification, Oscar II. First, he assumed that the nets could be intended to protect from UAVs or to cover themselves. A few days later, he found a photo from this base where Russian military sailors are visible on the path of the submarines and the nets, located over the bridge and over the submarines. From the image, it is seen that the nets perform anti-drone function. This indicates that the Russians are worried about the protection of their strategic military objects and nuclear submarines even thousands of kilometers from Ukraine, afraid of strikes on them. For more than a week, no mass launchers of Shaheds are recorded on Ukraine's territory, according to the channel Lapin. The number of launches does not even reach the number of daily production, which means that there is a accumulate. The reasons for this delay remain unknown, including the fact that Putin decided not to irritate Trump and his wife before the ultimatum expires. According to the state, on August 7 this year, the Russian armed forces launched 29,246 UAVs over Ukraine, according to Lapin. And from the use of Russian cabs and air bomb with the MPT module, on the contrary, it grew in July by 18%, consisting of 3,786 units, or on average 122 per day, Lapin also counted. According to it, the most active airstrikes are on the Pokrovsk and Sumsk directions, that is, where Russian armed forces are trying to advance most actively. That is why, when I discussed the air peace, I said to you that Putin will not go to it, since it will deprive the Russian army of one of the main benefits. In fact, that's how it came out. No one reminds me of the air peace anymore. On the Lemensk direction, Deep State recorded the further expansion of the Russian control zone in the Serebryansk forestry, where the front remained stable for not long, for many months. Also in this direction, in the area of Torskoy and Zerchnovo, the positions of Ukrainian defenders from the 3rd Army Corps tried to break through 25 Russian bikers, the military says. The 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade reported that the battle occurred on August 8, in the zone of their responsibility in Torskoy. 25 bikers tried to break through the defense of the 63rd Brigade in Torskoy, but we turned them into targets in the tire and made a real asterisk, said in the brigade. As reported in the brigade, the enemy was destroyed by the joint efforts of the Battalion of Unmanned Systems, artillery of the brigade, and with the support of the neighboring units, in particular, the 40th and 45th Artillery Brigades of the Regiment of Unmanned Systems, K2, as well as the units of the NGU and SBU. SINT researchers from the channel War Archive established that the enemy motorcycles were destroyed in the vicinity of the village of Torskoy and the village of Zerchnia. What has recently become known, reminds the Militarny, is that as part of the 3rd Army Corps, in addition to the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, which became the basis of the Corps, also entered the 53rd, 60th, and 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigades of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The 3rd Assault, 60th, and 63rd, together with the provided 66th Separate Mechanized Brigades, have a zone of responsibility of about 150 kilometers. This is about 1/8 of the entire range of the front. In the southern Donetsk direction, Deep State notes the advance of Russian armed forces in the Green Guy and in the area of Dachnovo in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The map of the project shows the first time a Russian armed forces control zone is marked on the territory of the neighboring region. The project separately stops at events around the last settlement. In the last update of the map, the designation of the settlement of Dachne appeared, the Dnipropetrovsk region, writes Deep State. It should be noted that expanding the red zone is in clarification describing the situation. The Russian armed forces record on the opposite bank of the Volkhya River from the village and cause constant pressure in the eastern area from the settlement of Dachne from the side of Novokrenka. Lately, occupiers have been trying to infiltrate the tree lines around the village, especially the tree lines of the northern village of Dachne. They're trying to accumulate, secure, or just hiding to survive. The Russian defense forces are trying to control the Russians' movement, destroying them when spotted, and making an effort to clear the positions taken from them. Accordingly, the main part of the Dachne settlement is in the gray zone, where active combat actions are taking place, since the Russian forces are not leaving an attempt to occupy the village, which has become fundamental to them, including from the point of view of amplifying media propaganda. The main resource of Russian armed forces, which they attract for assault actions, are small infantry groups. We want to report separately about the refutation of the information spread by separate Telegram channels and media in the public space about the fact of occupation of the village of Dachne, emphasized Deep State. Linking to our map, these media resources spread information to the appropriate reality and form a manipulative picture for the user. For those who do not know how to use the map, we publish an image of the border ministry of the village of Dachne and the passage of the red line, which is displayed only on the eastern outskirts of the villages, where there are only several houses. The village of Dachne is not under the occupation of Russian armed forces, occupants cannot secure themselves there, and it has been time to even normally approach the village. We monitor the development of events and react to any changes. We try to track actual information, which is often wasted in different sources, and the situation in this settlement has often been distorted since it is of media importance. However, for us it is fundamental to lighten the situation as close as possible to reality, independent of what it is, Deep State assures. Indeed, if things are bad in one or another area for the Ukrainian Defense Force, the analysts of the project are not afraid to report this, and so their promise is more valuable than the fact that the Russians have failed to take one or another settlement under control. Although all Z channels, even the ones that would seem adequate, have long been closely colored over by the Dachne and are in no hurry to be colored back. In the Toretsk direction, the Russian forces continue to try to cut off the Ukrainian group in the area of Toretsk itself and Sh Cherbanivka, south of the Klybinbik Reservoir. A comforting situation in this area, says the Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel officer, in the south of the Konstantinovsk direction. He writes, unfortunately, there is an unfavorable trend of Russian advance, which is trying to slip through small assault groups of 2 to 4 people through our positions. The main objects of attention of Russian armed forces are the settlement of Oleksandra Kalinova, almost completely occupied by the Russian forces except for several houses. Egatorovka, actual attention is concentrated on the flanks of the reservoir. The situation is complicated by the specialties of the area, namely by the Klybinbik Reservoir, which creates problems in the logistics on this sector. The closer the line of combat contact to it, the more these problems. Most likely the LBP will level out on the reservoir, the officer predicts. This, in turn, will mean Toretsk's final loss and the beginning of the battles already in the suburbs of Konstantinovka, I will add to myself. However, given that Toretsk has actually held out for more than a year, half a year from now, after his official capture of the Russian Ministry of Defense, the prospects of battles for Konstantinovka are not the most pleasant for the Russian forces. The Government of Defense of Ukraine carried out a diversified operation in the Krasnodarsk Krai of the Russian Federation, eliminating dozens of Russian troops earlier. Sources in the intelligence department reported this to the military. The morning of August 8, near the control and deployment point of the military unit of the 90th Airborne Brigade of the Air Defense, located in the village of Afipsk of the Krasnodarsk Krai, 2 explosions occurred. According to intelligence of scouts, as a result of the diversion, no less than 12 soldiers were eliminated by Russian armed forces. Tens of occupiers were injured. Unnamed vehicles are also reported to have been destroyed. Local Telegram channels reported the explosions at about 11 a.m., named the preliminary version of the explosion by gas tank to the equipment of the car. Sources in Goria note that the information about the explosion as a result of technical failure is spread to cover the facts of diversion on the territory of the military unit. At the same time, Russian armed forces are trying to delete the mention of the incident in the media and social networks. The military officer of the 90th Airborne Brigade, according to intelligence, participates in armed aggression against Ukraine in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia directions. According to open data, there are systems of air defense Buk M2 in the arms of military formation. In general, the statement is extremely interesting. We are waiting for necrologists and staff of destroyed equipment in satellite images. Ukrainian specialist in the field of drones Sergei Flash by Skresnov talks about the future of the unmanned case. He publishes a screenshot of the description of the Russian system of UAV control through the internet with a retranslation through Starlink. I will explain for myself how it works. The signal from the operator is first transferred through the internet to the retranslator, the equipped satellite communication system. Most often it will be in the current conditions, of course, Starlink. And the retranslator installed on a ground station or on a drone. These are already technical details. Transfer the commands from the operator to the drone itself, which in turn sent the video back to the retranslator, and then transfer it through the internet to the operator. The system has already been tested, you may remember the video about the neo-Nazis group Espanol, where they control drones under the Chasiv Yar from the cozy office in Moscow City. Ukrainian forces, in turn, have been using FPV drones starting from unmanned vehicles for a long time, which are controlled through the retranslator installed on the ground. The future of UAVs are experienced and unique pilots sitting somewhere in the rear city, commented on the Flash, and people who bring drones to the front line control through the internet. Russians are working on this. We are also making first steps, trying, testing, and then ground robots will bring drones to the front line. In fact, the main problem here is the delay. Well, that is, the delay from the transferred signal to the action of the drone itself. And on the contrary, that is, the transferred signal for how long has already passed in reality. That is, a part of the second can play a role, so the faster it is possible to establish a connection so that the delay is minimal and weakly separates itself from the fact that the drone is directly controlled not far from the front line, the more likely it will become massive. In fact, ground-based FPV drone carriers already exist, even now in the form of prototypes. The Z-channel Vomnia Svedomita tells about Ukrainian achievements in this area. Ukraine continues to experiment with the combat capabilities of ground-based robotic systems, writes there. The company RV presented a system of FPV drone carriers Korokurt, installed on the ground robotic platform Vepr. The complex consists of two directions, each of which can be placed on 3 FPV drones. Drone control is carried out either through a built-in side retranslator or through an air retranslator, which can be launched, including from the platform itself. This allows the drone to work at a distance of up to 30 kilometers. The platform can be deployed at a distance of up to 4 kilometers from the communication core. The system supports both single and double launch of drones. In double mode, 2 drones are controlled from one remote control unit and the operator can switch between them. Both drones can hit the same target. The second drone is located 30-40 meters behind the first and is automatically aimed at the target hit earlier. Military report also demonstrates the Russian ground-based robotic system Dronobus. It includes data transfer from the launch site of optovolokon and FPV drones, the represented OONTC, or rather, Korny. The vehicle weight is 150 kg. The optovolokon's length for the ground platform is up to 10 kms, for UAV up to 15 kms. As you can see, the future, which I talked about in my video, is already here. In this war, the advantage is not taken by those who drive more meat into the trench, but by those who master and scale new technologies faster. In particular, the preserve of life of the pilots is very important for Ukraine, because with Russian tactics and the total spread of small infantry groups, there are often situations when drone FPV operators are forced to engage in a firing battle. So let the best pilots sit in Kiev and be controlled by NRK. Drone operators from there, and another surprising news from the world of technology. In the Ukrainian sky, they noticed a modernized light-engined plane Z-137 Agro-Turbo, equipped with air-to-air missiles, the Militarny says. Footage from the plane was published by local residents. The civilian Z-137 Turboshock plane of Slovatsk production was redeployed to fulfill the tasks of air defense. Its rear units carried a typical reconnaissance sign for Army aviation from 2 white crossbars. Under the wings of the plane were installed 2 pylons of the AQ-73, which are allowed to use air-to-air missiles of the close range with the help of R-73. The use of R-73 missiles is initially not intended for this, perhaps due to their full autonomy. They do not require complex integration with radios or central drones of the plane, the Militarny notes. For targeting a target, the missile uses an infractable guidance system. In fact, to use any platform of such a missile, it is necessary only to bring it to the launch unit of the power supply and the channel for transferring the command to the launch. At the moment of use, the missile head voluntarily captures the thermal contrast target, and the search for such a target can be carried out with the help of officers at the Combat Command Center, who have access to ground-based radars and can adjust the direction of the flight direction of the drone. Considering the type of weapons and the possibility of the plane developing at a speed of 200-250 km/h, the task of such a combat unit could be to intercept Russian drone and operational tactical UAVs. The use of turbofist planes for such tasks allows a significant increase in the capabilities of air forces, as well as to download full-fledged fighters for more priority tasks, the military concludes. And a little bit about how the Russian offensive goes from the point of view of its direct participants. The soldiers of the 3rd Battalion of the 55th Separate Guard Rifle Brigade, Military Unit 55115, it is reported that after the injury he was not provided with the appropriate medical care, and they are sent to a combat task. I did not sign a document to become a slave to all this indecency of a soldier. I thought I came to really fight, and I got into a meat-cutting machine. As a result of shrapnel wounds, the man developed a serious inflammation and violation of leg fiber. According to him, this is not a single case. The command of the unit covers the lack of a personnel due to the injured. Invalid people are sent without hands or feet to remember their tatka at the air defense. In addition, the soldier stated that he did not receive compensation for the wound, and on March 25 he was stopped from being paid money. According to the command, the reason became a criminal case filed against the serviceman. This is no longer in what framework. I did not receive any compensation for the wound. The work stopped for me in March, as I can already mean. Some money came to him until March. He also told about the cruel treatment of officers with personnel. According to him, some commanders shoot down subordinates and not allowing them to receive treatment, again send them to combat missions. The soldier clarified that due to this, many soldiers leave the unit on their own, and in some cases they even reach a suicide. A person was shot at, he is also tired, someone runs, someone shoots. He shot himself, my friend, he shot himself. Listen to me, the brains of a 24-year-old boy, his name is Jur, because they wound him up in his family. Everything was normal, they are just here. He just can't handle all this, the videos that help us, it's impossible, we're injured here. Many are injured, well, someone was not at the task. Someone is already injured and they still make us fight here, as if we were healthy. The Russian military police. Time, the military corps paid attention to Andrei Filatov. The post was noticed by the collector of Z folklore, Ivan Filipov, for which he is very grateful. So, here's what Filatov writes.
Описали мне ситуацию с военнослужащим водителем. В Малиновке попал под обстрел. Выехали по дороге в Донецк на первом же посту военной полиции.
The soldier stopped him, filed I know restriction for smoking in his. A reason logical smokers. They'll end the soldier weakens the unit. On the power of the second time. Literally on the next post, 23 p.m. They stopped and complained that he was not in the set of clothes. The soldier was wearing an armored vest and a t-shirt. Military police officers carefully noted that the t-shirt was not that color of violation and very rude. It is impossible to argue here. I would shoot for such a thing at least. The next day, the same soldier left the medical service in Cheriton. It is good that on the road there was immediately a look from the combat crew of the military police. The employees noted the unattached security belt. Here it is impossible to agree. The security belt increases the chances of surviving an accident, and in the current conditions, the increased activity of enemy FPVs also increases the chances, but negative. Another 5 minutes later, this driver again stops the military police. The prohibitive officer carefully read that he could not reach the medical service so quickly to the place where it was stopped. Immediately some kind of prohibition was writ to him. Here it does not work much. In such a situation, I would not conduct a special investigation into the content and confiscation of the car until the investigation of the conditions. Finally, the driver drove away, and immediately after 20 meters, he stopped near the magazine. The military police immediately came up, although you will not say it at once, they were wearing non-uniform. They began to get into the car, stating that the driver did not close it, although he closed it by the word of the military police, the law. It was people without headscarves of the military police, without signs of contrast, military police, but they screamed loud and scaredly yelled at each other. A machine came to them on civilian numbers. Another military police officer came from there and began to frame violations, which are about the supposedly unclothed military officers and not about the defense forces with the violation of the uniform or what you could think there. Why is the defense officer in the machine with civilian numbers? For the effect of the unexpected, because in the war it is necessary to use wise tactical tactics. Ukrainians do not expect this, but it means that the front is about to collapse, receiving Ukraine. Why is this happening? Ends to ironicize Filatov. Half of the military police are themselves frontliners. Some were fighting right, some were even in assaults. But they don't want to be at the front anymore, and so they come to military police and become such beep as these bad people. This is not about who is six. They are not recruited by enemy intelligence to make the brave officer of military police feel so bad. To be or not to be such a person is an internal choice of a specific person, concludes Filatov. Well, the resident of the city of Tuymaz in Bashkortostan says that it happens when Russian military return from the front. She said about the attack on a participant of the war in Ukraine. Local publics write about this. According to them, on the night of August 2 to 3, Anna returned home, and going out of the tunnel, she noticed that a man was pursuing her. According to the victim, he yelled at her for unfit offers and threats, after which he attacked her, hit her in the nose several times on the head, and then hidden. Eyewitnesses called emergency services and the police. The victim was taken to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with brain tremor, multiple hematomas, and a decrease in vision by one eye. In addition, after the attack, the woman had problems with sleep and panic attacks. The accused, Sergei, a war participant in Ukraine, was in Tuymaz on vacation for injury. Earlier, he was already involved in administrative responsibility for theft and was a figurehead of the criminal case under the article Revert. At the time of the publication, he was not detained, and most likely there will be no meet more important. Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.